There. We now take you to the United Nations, where council members are discussing the worsening food security environment and relevant obligations under international humanitarian law, as well as challenges in mobilizing adequate and timely resources for humanitarian assistance.
Underscores the importance of the subject matter under discussion.
I have no camera there.
I now give the floor to the Secretary General, His Excellency, Mr. Antonio Guterres.
Madam President, Excellencies, thank you for this opportunity to brief you on the links between conflict and hunger, an urgent and important issue. And today I have one simple message. If you don't feed people, you feed conflict. Conflict drives hunger and famine drive conflict. When a country or region is gripped by conflict and hunger, they become mutually reinforcing. They cannot be resolved separately. Hunger and poverty combined with inequality, climate shocks, sectarian and ethnic tension, grievances over land and resources to spark and drive conflict. At the same time, conflict forces people to leave their homes, land and jobs, disrupts agriculture and trade, reduces access to vital resources like water and electricity, and so drives hunger. The Nobel Committee recognized this link when it awarded the Nobel Peace Prize to the World Food Programme, a powerful call to action recognizing the importance of food security to building peace and stability. We have made enormous inroads into hunger over recent decades, thanks to improved productivity and reductions in global poverty. Famine and hunger are no longer about lack of food. They are now largely man-made, and I use the term deliberately. They are concentrated in countries affected by large-scale, protracted conflict, and they are rising. At the end of 2020, more than 88 million people were suffering from acute hunger due to conflict and instability, a 20% increase in 1 year. And projections for 2021 point to a continuation of this frightening trend. I must warn the Council that we face multiple conflict-driven famines around the world. Climate shocks and the COVID-19 pandemic are adding fuel to the flames. Without immediate action, millions of people will reach the brink of extreme hunger and death. Projections show hunger crisis escalating and spreading across the Sahel and the Horn of Africa, and accelerating in South Sudan, Yemen, and Afghanistan. There are more than 30 million people in over 3,000 countries just one step away from a declaration of famine. And women and girls face a double risk. They are more likely to be forced from their homes by conflict, and they are more vulnerable to malnutrition, particularly when pregnant or breastfeeding are relevant. Girls who are angry are at increased risk of trafficking, forced marriage, and other abuses. Food insecurity is worsened by the reduction of humanitarian access. I'm deeply concerned about the situation in Tigray, Ethiopia, where the harvest season has been disrupted by insecurity and violence, and hundreds of thousands of people could be experiencing hunger. Madam President, in some countries, famine is already here. People are dying from hunger and suffering critical rates of malnutrition. Parts of Yemen, South Sudan, and Burkina Faso are in the grip of famine or conditions akin to famine. And more than 150,000 people are at the risk of starving. In Yemen, 5 years of conflict have displaced 4 million people across the country. And many Yemenis are facing a death sentence as widespread hunger stalks their nation. Around half of all children under 5, 2.3 million, are projected to face acute malnutrition in 2021. And some 60 million people face food insecurity. South Sudan is facing its highest levels of food insecurity since the country declared independence 10 years ago. 60% of the population are increasingly hungry. And food prices are so high that just one plate of rice and beans costs more than 180% of the average daily salary, the equivalent of about $400 here in New York. chronic sporadic violence, extreme weather, and the economic impact of COVID-19 have pushed more than 7 million people into acute food insecurity. The Democratic Republic of the Congo experienced the world's largest food crisis last year, with nearly 21.8 million people facing acute hunger between July and December. The targeting of WFP vehicles in the east of the country last month, and the tragic killing of our colleague Mustafa Milambo, as well as the Italian ambassador Luca Attanasio and the security officer Vittorio Iacovacci, are the starkest possible illustration of the dark alliance between hunger and conflict. Madam President, this is a devastating reality in conflict zones around the world. We have a responsibility to do everything in our power to reverse these trends, starting by preventing famine. Last September, the Secretariat provided a white paper outlining the risks of famine in 4 countries. The situation has only grown more urgent. Hunger and deaths begin long before the highest levels of food insecurity. We must anticipate and act now. I have therefore decided to establish a high-level task force on preventing famine, led by my Under-Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs and Emergency Relief Coordinator, Mark Lowcock. This task force will include representatives from the World Food Programme and the Food and Agriculture Organization. And it will bring coordinated high-level attention to famine prevention and mobilize support to the most affected countries. I've also asked the Under-Secretary General Lowcock to draw on the support of other interagency standing committee members and obviously including UNICEF, the World Health Organization, UNHCR, the UN Development Programme, UNFPA and UN Women. And the group will cooperate with the non-governmental organizations who are our vital partners in feeding the hungry around the world. And will also work with international financial institutions and other specialized UN agencies, including the International Fund for Agricultural Development. I urge all members of this Council to support the task force in every way possible and to do everything in your power to take urgent action to prevent famine. Madam President, our most serious concern must be the more than 34 million people who already face emergency levels of acute food insecurity. WFP and FAO have appealed for the emergency mobilization of $5.5 billion in extraordinary resources to avert catastrophe for these 34 million women, men, girls and boys. These resources are needed for a comprehensive package of life-saving aid, including the distribution of food, cash and vouchers, targeted support for agriculture and medical treatment for people already suffering from acute malnutrition. All countries face some economic strain as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. The solution does not lie in cutting aid to starving children. The disappointing outcome of last week's high-level pledging event on Yemen cannot become a pattern. I ask all countries to reconsider their responsibilities and their capacities. The relatively small amounts of money involved in humanitarian aid are an investment not only in people, but an investment in peace. Madame la Présidente, les personnes souffrant de faim aiguë doivent pouvoir accéder à la nourriture et à une assistance vitale en toute sécurité, en particulier durant des conflits armés.
Especially during armed conflict. In accordance with Resolution 2417 of this Council and under international humanitarian law, objects that are indispensable to the survival of civilian populations such as foodstuffs, crops, and livestock must be protected.